All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're looking at a fascinating story from the world of real estate. It's happening in Michigan City, Indiana, and honestly, the market there is sending some super confusing signals. It's a real puzzle. So I want to kick things off with just one number, and that number is 52.8%. Now, just tuck that away for a second, because that single number, it's the key to this entire mystery. It's why this particular market seems to be playing by a whole different set of rules. And that number leads us straight to the big question we're tackling in this explainer. See, on paper, Michigan City looks like a classic seller's market. But if that's really the case, then why are more than half the sellers cutting their prices? It doesn't make any sense, right? All right, so to figure this out, we have to look at the two completely different stories the data is telling us. It's like it has a split personality. One story says sellers are holding all the cards. The other story, it kind of looks like they're panicking. So let's dig into the evidence. Okay, first things first, let's do a super quick refresh on what a seller's market even is. It's all about simple supply and demand, you know? If you have way more people trying to buy houses than you have houses for sale, that's a seller's market. A common way to measure this is months of supply. Anything under, say, 5 or 6 months of inventory means sellers should be in the driver's seat. And this is where the puzzle really takes shape. Look at this. On one hand, you have the classic sign of a seller's advantage, just 2.7 months of supply. I mean, to give you some context, a normal, balanced market is closer to 6 months. So 2.7, that should mean fierce competition for homes. But then, on the other side of the coin, you have this crazy statistic. 52.8% of sellers have had to cut their price. So how can both of these things be true at the same time? That's the contradiction we need to solve. So where do we start? Well, let's begin with the biggest clue we have, this massive wave of price drops. You know, it's the sheer scale of this that's just so wild. We're talking more than half of all sellers are slashing their prices. Now, compare that to the tiny, tiny fraction. We're talking less than 2% who felt bold enough to raise their price. This isn't just a small trend. This is the main event in this market right now. So what does this tell us? Well, the big takeaway here is that sellers are clearly under a lot of pressure. When you see this many price cuts, it's a huge sign that the initial asking prices were just way off the mark for what buyers were actually willing to pay. And get this, they're not just giving up and pulling their homes off the market. Nope, they're staying in the fight and changing their strategy in real time. Okay, so that brings us to the second huge clue in this investigation. It's this standoff between buyers and sellers. And you can measure this whole standoff with one simple number. 77 days. Let that sink in. That's the median time a house is just sitting on the market at Michigan City. We're talking over 2.5 months. And this time on market is such a critical piece of the puzzle. Think about it. The longer a house just sits there with a for sale sign out front, the more power leaks away from the seller and flows over to the buyer. Every single day that ticks by just adds a little more pressure on the seller to cut a deal. And that right there, that's the connection. That's the link between our two clues. This long 77-day wait is the exact reason sellers are being forced to rethink their strategy. They start out ambitious, they list high, but after weeks and weeks with no real action, they have to get realistic and drop the price to actually get someone to the closing table. Okay, so now we have all the clues. We have the motive, we have the evidence. Let's put it all together and finally solve this thing. It really boils down to a simple 4-step story. Step 1, sellers look at the low number of homes for sale and think, hey, it's a hot market. So they list their homes at these really optimistic, high prices. But then step 2, buyers see those prices and they just say, nope. They hold off and the homes start to pile up unsold. Then comes step 3. That 77-day clock starts ticking and the pressure builds and builds on those sellers, which leads us to the final step, 4. To break the gridlock, more than half of them cave and cut their prices down to a level that buyers are actually comfortable with. And you don't have to just take my word for it. This conclusion is exactly what the data analysts are seeing. Here's a quote from Rachel Bader at HW Data. She says, this isn't some kind of market crash. It's a recalibration. It's a great word for it, right? Sellers are just being forced by the market to bring their expectations back down to earth and meet the buyers where they actually are. So, we've solved the puzzle of what's been happening, but what about what's coming next? Because this story is definitely not over. And if you want to know where this market is headed, there are 3 key numbers you need to be watching. Think of this as your dashboard for the Michigan City market. First, you've got to keep an eye on that price cut rate, which is at 52.8% right now. Does that number start to come down as prices find their sweet spot, or does it stay high? Second, watch that 77-day time on market. If sellers have finally priced things right, that number should start dropping because homes will sell faster. And finally, keep an eye on that 2.7 months of supply. If that number starts creeping up, it could be a sign that this isn't just a seller's market with overpriced homes, but a market that's fundamentally shifting. And all of this leaves us with one last really big question. Is this whole situation in Michigan City just a weird local story, a one-off? Or is this standoff between what sellers want and what buyers can afford a little preview of a much bigger correction that we could start seeing in other markets all across the country? Now that is the real puzzle to keep an eye on.